Hello, and welcome to Books in the World. I'm your host, Kathleen Murphy. Books in the World is an interview show produced by the Cape Cod Writers Center and the Cape Media Center. The Writers Center was established 60 years ago and sponsors a 4-day writers conference every summer on Cape Cod. The goal of Books in the World is to show how writers, illustrators, publishers, editors, and others in the literary field play their roles in the world of books and other communication media. This show has been broadcast continuously since 1978, making it the longest-running program of its kind in the United States. Today, we are delighted to welcome Janis Robinson Daly, author of the book, The Unlocked Path. Welcome, Janis.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Delighted to be with you or Zooming with you today.
This is a debut novel for Janis. She's a graduate of Wheaton College in Massachusetts with a BA in psychology. She strives to explore female-centric issues and the power of supportive relationships that develop among women. Released at the end of 2022, The Unlocked Path has already earned excellent reviews. Juliet Fay, a USA Today best-selling author, says it is bursting with historical detail on every page. Kirkus Reviews said it calls it an often riveting fictional testament of a doctor's life at the turn of the 20th century. And I am so looking forward to talking about this with you today. So welcome again. Yeah. Let's start with a little bit of background here. So what motivated you to write this book?
Well, unlike many authors, writing was not my dream from early childhood days, but I've always been a reader, and I've always been an avid reader. Historical fiction is my favorite, always learning so much through those types of novels. But it really was when I started some genealogy research on my grandmother Robinson's family and discovered that her great-great-grandfather, or her grandfather, my great-great, was a founder of the Women's Medical College in Pennsylvania. Went to Wheaton when it was still a women's college, so I had an immediate interest in learning more about those graduates. Women at the late 1800s, turn of the 20th century, who, when men were mostly all the doctors, there were only about 5% of doctors were women at the time. So I needed to learn more about those women and what drove them and got them interested in medicine, why, and what did they do? What did they accomplish? And really felt like they were another segment of women in history who have been kind of lurking in the shadows, and thought that their stories needed to be told. So let me at them.
And it is wonderful. You really dive in well. And I think it's lovely that so many of these stories seem to be coming out now. It seems to be a discovery of untold stories of women that really changed history or influenced history greatly. You've included so many elements that I love about historical fiction. It's an engaging story. It has colorful characters. And by the end of it, I had learned about life and world events in the early 1900s. I'd learned about the cities of Philadelphia and Boston. I'd learned more about women's healthcare practices or lack thereof. So can you give us an overview of your book? How would you describe your book?
So The Unlocked Path is really opening the eyes and generating interest in the choices that women were starting to grab for themselves at the turn of the 20th century. The phrase "a new woman" came into play at that time, and it was really starting to describe a educated woman, career-focused, independent-minded, and there were many books at the time coming out that played into it. Kate Chopin's The Awakening is meant to be and thought to be one of the precursors of feminist theory. Published in 1897, which is when my character begins medical school. So the story follows Eliza Edwards, who is a composite fictional character, enters medical school, much to the chagrin of her mother, who felt that a society debut would be the much better path for her, and continues to follow Eliza and her classmates through their 4 years of medical school, into residency, into early practice, and of course, all those world events that were happening around them in the early 1900s. Everything from the sinking of the Titanic comes and makes an appearance. Of course, World War I and the Spanish flu, another global pandemic incident and episode of our lives. The suffrage movement, of course, extremely active, and then culminating with the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1918. So lots of information presented, and how those events really affected the people of the time, and specifically Eliza Edwards, my main character.
Mm. I loved her mother. She was so tenacious. Actually,
Her only daughter, as am I, an only daughter with two older brothers. So there's some affinity there with Eliza.
it's good, but you're right. The amount of history that she lived through was so pivotal to the way that we live our lives now. I mean, it's incredible. Yeah, and you covered a lot of it. It was really well done.
Thank you.
On page 61, Eliza reads from Gray's Anatomy. The heart continues increasing, and also in length, breadth, and thickness. Just one of the many interesting medical facts that you scatter liberally through this story. How did you research this, and did anything surprise you?
Well, a lot of research, because I do not have a medical background. Full disclosure, degree in psychology, but never went down the clinical route with that. So you mentioned Gray's Anatomy, and yes, I did pick up from the West Barnstable reference library, used it on their premises, Gray's Anatomy. Did not read all 1,400 pages, but leaped through some pertinent sections that I wanted to pull forward, some medical references that would move my story forward. And that mention about the heart is relevant because it's actually connected, and they call out that a male heart is larger than a woman's. So I had to set the story straight there. But so Gray's Anatomy, of course, yes. But beyond that, I interviewed and spoke with many women in medicine. I had beta readers who were women in medicine as well, to make sure that I had that authentic voice. And spent a whole day in the archives of Drexel University's medical school, who actually took over all of the artifacts from the Women's Medical College when they merged finally in 2002. So yes, that was a lot of my research, and nonfiction books, of course, came into play as well. As far as some other surprises that I learned during that point in history, my main character and many of her classmates go, of course, into maternity care as women, and went that route because, of course, they were women, they understood women's issues, but there was a demand for women versus midwives, which had served women and continue to serve women today in very adequate care and sympathy and empathy during their maternity cases. But at the time of the late 1800s, women were starting to turn to hospitals and going to hospitals for birthing. And, but male doctors were on staff versus a midwife. And so that was something that bothered a lot of women. So learning more just about maternity care then, one surprise was the start of use of chloroform. Of course, a lot of us today received or begged for epidurals. But back then, chloroform actually only became popular after Queen Victoria insisted on it for her 8th birth, and then, raved about it, like a celebrity endorsement. So that information was pretty surprising. I never knew how chloroform started to be used.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I love that. I love
That was so that was one surprise, and then of course learning all about the Comstock laws, which prohibited the dissemination or distribution of any information about birth control.
Yeah.
It could not be put in the mail. Um, Women could access some contraceptives by prescription only. Women, married women, had to get the permission of their husbands to request a prescription.
It
So
was truly a different time.
it was,
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah. So Eliza faces many difficulties through this book. There's a particular paragraph in chapter 38 that gives us an insight on some of these challenges. Would you mind reading that paragraph for us?
Oh, I'd be delighted to. So chapter 38 is well into the book, and we have arrived in the year 1918. Eliza, like so many of the times, would spend her evenings reading the newspaper. The evening edition, after the morning edition came in the morning.
When there were two papers in a day.
There were two papers a day. And she gathers with her mother and one of her aunts who lives nearby. It's again 1918, early fall, September, I think it is. And her husband, not too many spoilers, but her husband is in France, World War One. And of course, all the headlines are about what's going on in France,
Right.
and how our troops are faring and updates. So Eliza's reading all those headlines and turns the page to continue on to, I don't remember what page it was of the Boston Globe. I actually pulled this idea from that. She continues a story on, let's say it was page 38 or something. And down below, there's a small article that talks about treatment of some soldiers out at Fort Devens, which is the Army base west of Boston. And there were some influenza cases that had popped up. And the commander of the base and Army doctor is kind of dismissing it. It's no big deal. It's 1,000 cases. And Eliza's like, that's a lot of cases. That is a big deal.
Mm.
And as a trained doctor with a sense of calling to care and to heal, she volunteers and goes to Fort Devens to offer her services because, of course, so many doctors and nurses are in France. So there's a shortage. So this paragraph is after her first day volunteering at Fort Devens.
Mm.
Starting in her heart, fatigue claimed her body. A throb in her temples spread to a twitch in her fingers. Eliza knew exhaustion on a first-hand name basis. Over her career, it visited her often, made itself at home, and settled into her bones. But this debilitation consumed her unlike any other time. Her life classified fatigue into physical or emotional. Exam study, double shifts at the hospital, and looking after two energetic sons required physical exertion. The heartbreak of losing Patrick, cradling a dying patient's hand, dealing with Harrison's volatility, or concern over her children's health drove emotional exhaustion. Here, she fought a simultaneous battle. Hour after hour, she tended to patients. She lifted their limbs, walked the rows in an endless loop like Will's train set, and carried trays of water and salves. Her arms and legs numbed. Men died, not one, not two, but 8 over the course of 9 hours. The enormity of it drained every fiber of her verve. A helpless anguish seized control.
Well, yeah. She's really quite a character. She's got so much self-motivation. She's a little energy source. Very bound and determined. It's very good. Admirable. So the pace of this book, that's the other thing is you as a writer have really tracked this energy and really kind of kept the pace of the book and her striving to accomplish the goals, the significant goals that she's set forth. So it kept me rooting for Eliza. Did you start with the plot and then fill in the details, or did you collect several stories and then try to string them together? How did you go about assembling the book, the narrative?
Sure. Well, when I chose the time period, 1897 to 1920, I really chose it because of the historical events
Mm.
and felt that they could be anchors for me to direct the timeline of Eliza's life. Coincidentally, the same timeline is the timeline of my grandmother's life, my grandmother Robinson. So who kind of started me on my journey. So I do use the historical events as some anchors and then bring in the characters that are going to be impacted by those events. But so somewhat plot driven first, I guess, with the history, but really let my characters develop and evolve and be revised even. And some scenes were revised quite a bit as things were happening around me. As I was writing, I mean, I did finish my manuscript by the end of 2019, was making a few revisions in January. And then guess what happened by February, March of 2020?
Yeah, the COVID struck.
Right.
So here you were talking about influenza and serious events in history, and boom, you get struck with one.
I'm living it, and I'm watching on the news every night and every morning and every afternoon, and I'm seeing our medical professionals
Yeah.
so dedicated to dealing with that incredible crisis, and how they would come home and have to sleep in the garage or basement because they didn't want to go near their families, you know, hands up against plexiglass. So that chapter about the Spanish flu, I did end up going back in and revising and bringing in some of that real time
Right.
drama and trauma that we were all living through.
That exhaustion. Yeah.
Yeah, you could see it on the faces, you know, of again of our medical professionals, you know, on the news every day. Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. Wow. That's wonderful. So history and present day informing your writing is wonderful. Yeah. It's fair to say that though women's healthcare at the beginning of the 20th century was seriously lacking, well, of course, they didn't know. I mean, they were doing the best that they could under the circumstances. But you didn't shy away from the medical traumas that women faced, especially poor and immigrant groups. So was it difficult to find their stories? Was it difficult to write their stories?
Difficult to find some of their stories, yes.
Mm.
Uh, because again, a lot hasn't been written about women in history. I did source a couple of books that were written. One in particular was called The Worst of Times, and it addresses, you know, a very serious women's health issue. And they were real life stories or histories, narratives in that I drew upon, certainly to touch upon a few different subjects. And, you know, then personal experiences. I've had family and friends that have battled breast cancer.
Mm.
Some have survived, some have not.
Mm.
Uh, you know, and just so that message about women's health care, it is so pertinent and affects so many of us on different levels. And felt that you know, I'm talking about women doctors. I can't shy away from those issues. I had to address them. They were very much a part of life then and life now.
Mhm.
So some of them were very difficult to write. But I've also been told that a few of those chapters that I go deep on some of those subjects are some of the best chapters of the book.
Yeah, they're very good, and you handle it very sensitively. I mean, it's not harsh. I mean, the subject is important. The subjects that you cover are important, but you handle them delicately. It's well done. Yeah.
Great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sure. Sure. So Eliza, though, in spite of all these difficulties that she faced and what points of history that she was involved with, she was lucky to be influenced and supported by a colorful group of women. She had family, she had friends, she had fellow students. And I understand that some of them were inspired by real people. You said earlier that some of your family members, but you had your own ancestors as well. So can you expound on that a little bit?
Sure. So writing historical fiction, do want to bring in some real life people for and fictionalize them a little bit, taking that creative license because we're writing fiction, not a biography. So three women doctors in particular influenced my writing and make an appearance in the book. Anna Dabai Gopal Joshi, who was the first woman from India to earn a degree in the West, a medical degree. Olga Pavinsky from Lithuania. She becomes actually Eliza's best friend and roommate and classmate and confidant. She arrived from Lithuania in 1897 to attend Women's Medical College.
And she's very spunky. I really enjoyed her. She was very spunky. Yeah, very fun. Yeah.
She was inspired by some research and snippets that I read about her that implied a spunkiness. She's also a little bit based on my own college roommate. So so I had to bring some of those character traits in.
Oh, very flattering. That's what
she doesn't know it yet.
Okay.
And the third one is Charlotte Fairbanks, who is also a very highly skilled woman who arrives at Women's Medical College with degrees in hand from Smith and Yale before she starts. And she goes on to be chief surgeon with the American Women's Hospital in France.
Wow.
And serves. Yeah.
That's Charlotte in the book.
That's Charlotte. Charlotte Fairbanks.
Yeah. Yes. Driven, determined. Nothing was going to stand in her way.
No, it was very cut, straight and narrow, like a surgeon should.
Yes, exactly. How was the writing and the publishing process for you? Do you have any advice for fellow writers?
Oh gosh.
It's a tough one.
My debut novel, so I'm still learning. I'm still learning a lot every single day.
Yeah.
But it's it's an all-in.
Mm-hmm.
It really is all in. You have to be dedicated and committed. If you want to see this happen, if you want to hold your book in your hands, you're the only one that's really going to make that happen. And it takes it's a lot of work. It's a lot of being open to learning, taking criticism when you have a beta reader or an editor reading and going with that, or deciding, no, I'm not going to. Well, then why? You better have a pretty solid case as to why you're going to ignore that advice. And start early with the marketing. I have a career spent in sales and marketing, and I really like to stress that how important that is, to start building your brand and name recognition before your book even hits the bookstore shelves.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. I did sneak a peek at your Facebook page, and I love that you're posting other books that you love, and you're enthusiastically talking about what you're facing as you get to the process of releasing this book. So it's a good education actually in how to be enthusiastic on Facebook and with your platform, as you say. Yeah, it's good. Do you have another project in the works?
I do. So my original manuscript was actually an entire life of Eliza Edwards, not just a coming of age. But one piece of excellent feedback I received from an editor was, too long. You're a debut novelist. Don't do it. Set your readers up for a sequel.
There you go.
So I ended up taking my manuscript, chopping off about 30 years.
Oh.
I did take some subject matter and wove that into the current book.
Mhm.
But so I also heard from a lot of my beta readers that what happens next for Eliza? You got us to 1920 when she's really just starting out. Well, what else? So sequel is in the works. I've already begun research, and we'll be taking Eliza and Olga um, from we're gonna jump a little bit, and we're gonna pick it up in the Depression, because of course we have more historical events to look at. Of course, there's World War II. There's another serious health epidemic going on in the country, affecting our children, which news out today and this
Yeah.
week, apparently coming back. So that's going to be interesting with the polio situation.
Yes.
So there's a lot more research to do. I'm hoping to get to Warm Springs, Georgia, and Hickory, North Carolina, for some of my firsthand research spots related to the polio treatment.
That sounds really fun. And I've gotten to know these characters so well. I'm looking forward to reading it. So you'll have to let me know when you're ready to release the next one.
Oh, let's hope it's not another 5 years.
Hey, these things, creativity, it takes time, right? So remind me again now, your website is, and how do we order your book?
Wonderful, thank you. So website is Janis, and that's Janis R Daly DALY.com. So Janis and Daly are both the short versions. So my website has all the information about the book and all my upcoming and scheduled events. Right through early 2023, I have things scheduled already. Some of my recommendations as well. So I have a complete list of my favorites of historical fiction, women in history books, both historical fiction and biographies and memoirs. I have a newsletter that you can sign up for on the website. And the Unlocked Path will be available on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. Ask any of your local independent stores to order it for you, or your library. So yes, lots of different ways, and should be widely available.
That's excellent. I hope that a lot of people do order it. And I thank you very much for talking with me today about the Unlocked Path.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. It's been a pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see more, you'll find links to them through our website, capecodwriterscenter.org, through our Facebook page, and on YouTube. Thank you again for watching Books in the World.